The bench stood beneath an old plane tree whose leaves filtered the late afternoon light into soft, trembling patterns on the pavement, and the air carried the faint mix of cut grass, distant traffic, and something warm that felt like a memory rather than a smell. The U.S. Marine sat there with the posture that never quite leaves a person, even in rest, his back straight, shoulders squared, eyes scanning without seeming to search, as if awareness had become a second heartbeat. Beside him lay his dog, a large German shepherd with a coat the color of burnished earth, muscles relaxed but ready, ears twitching at every sound, trained not only to protect but to understand silence. The leash was loose in the Marine's hand, not because the dog needed control, but because trust had long replaced command. People passed by without lingering, some glancing briefly at the uniform, others at the dog, most too wrapped in their own lives to notice the quiet gravity of the pair. Then the girl approached, slowly, deliberately, her cane touching the ground in a steady rhythm that announced her presence before her voice ever could. Each step carried a careful balance between determination and caution, as if she had learned long ago that the world was not built to meet her halfway. She paused a few feet away, fingers tightening around the strap of her bag, eyes flicking first to the Marine, then to the dog, then back again, calculating risk the way experience teaches you to do without thinking. People often assumed fear lived only on one side of such encounters, but she knew better. "May I sit here?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm, practiced in politeness, shaped by years of asking permission for space others took without question. For a fraction of a second, the Marine was caught off guard, not by the request itself, but by the humility in it, by the fact that she felt the need to ask it all. His eyes met hers, and in that instant he saw not fragility but effort, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly. Before he could answer, the dog rose smoothly to his feet, tail wagging once, then again, stepping aside with an instinctive grace that felt almost ceremonial. The Marine exhaled and smiled, shifting his weight to make room. "Of course," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying the same calm he had used in places far louder and far more dangerous than this park. She lowered herself onto the bench carefully, the movement practiced, controlled, and when she finally settled, a quiet relief passed through her shoulders, as if she had been holding tension there all day without realizing it. For a moment, none of them spoke, the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty, broken only by the distant laughter of children and the soft rustle of leaves overhead. The dog lay down again, but not in his original place. Instead, he positioned himself closer to her, resting his head near her shoes, warmth radiating from him in a way that felt grounding, intentional. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise giving way to a hesitant smile. "He's friendly," she said, half asking, half hoping. "He is," the Marine replied, watching the dog with a hint of wonder in his expression. "But he doesn't do that with just anyone." She laughed, a small sound at first, almost as if she didn't trust it, then a real one that escaped before she could stop it, and something about that laugh loosened the air around them. She reached down slowly, careful not to startle him, and when her fingers brushed his fur, the dog leaned into her touch, eyes half closing, as if this contact had been expected all along. The Marine noticed the way her hand trembled just slightly, not from fear but from effort, and how she adjusted her posture to keep balance, small corrections invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. He realized then how much energy it must take simply to exist in a world that demanded constant adaptation. She noticed his gaze and smiled apologetically, as if she had done something wrong. "I'm fine," she said quickly, words sharpened by habit, by the need to reassure others before herself. "I didn't think otherwise," he replied gently, and meant it. Another sound cut through the calm, a skateboard clattering against concrete, and the dog's ears flicked back, body tensing for just a heartbeat before settling again, reassured by the nearness of both humans. The Marine's hand rested instinctively on the dog's back, fingers pressing lightly into familiar muscle, a silent check-in. She watched this exchange with quiet fascination, recognizing the language of unspoken understanding. "He trusts you," she said, more statement than compliment. The Marine nodded. "We've been through a lot together." She considered this, then said softly, "It shows." The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching longer across the path, And for the first time that day, neither of them felt watched or judged or measured. There was no need to explain, no need to perform strength or patience or bravery. There was just a bench, a marine, a dog, and a girl who had asked for permission and been met with something far rarer than space. In that simple moment, something subtle shifted, the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with drama, but settles quietly into memory, waiting to be understood later. As the lights softened and the sounds of the park settled into a gentle, evening rhythm, the girl found herself speaking without quite deciding to, her words emerging slowly at first, and then gaining momentum, as if the quiet acceptance of the bench had opened a door she usually kept closed. She spoke about how she used to run without thinking, how the ground had once felt like something she owned, something that answered to her feet, until one moment rewrote everything and taught her the weight of gravity in a way no lesson ever could. She did not describe the accident in dramatic terms, only mentioned the hospital smell that never fully leaves your memory, the ceilings you learn by heart when you spend too long staring at them, and the way doctors speak in careful tones when they are not yet sure how much hope they are allowed to give. The Marine listened without interruption, his attention steady and unforced, the kind that does not hurry a person through their own story. The dog's breathing was slow and even, his head still resting against her leg, a solid presence that seemed to anchor her words to something real. She admitted that the cane had once felt like an enemy, a public announcement of a private loss, and that she had avoided mirrors for months because she did not recognize the person who needed help to stand. When she paused, embarrassed by the honesty of it all, the Marine did not rush to reassure her or offer solutions. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging something important had been placed between them. In return, she asked about him, about the uniform that drew both respect and distance, about the dog whose calm seemed earned rather than trained. His gaze drifted to the trees as he answered, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested long nights and longer memories. He told her about heat that felt alive, about dust that coated everything, about the way silence before danger was louder than any explosion. He spoke of trust built not with words, but with shared survival, of learning to read a dog's posture the way others read facial expressions, and of how that dog had once alerted him seconds before a blast that would have ended both their lives. As he said this, his hand tightened briefly in the dog's fur, a reflex born of gratitude and lingering fear. A sudden sharp sound cut through the air, a car backfiring on a nearby street, and the dog stiffened instantly, muscles coiling, breath quickening, eyes searching for a threat that wasn't there. The Marine reacted just as fast, murmuring a command meant to ground and focus. But before it could fully take effect, the girl moved, her hand pressing gently but firmly against the dog's shoulder, her voice dropping into a low, steady cadence. She didn't tell him to calm down. She simply spoke, nonsensical words woven together with reassurance, the same way nurses once had to her when panic tightened her chest and stole her breath. The dog hesitated, confusion flickering, then slowly his body softened, tension melting away as if someone had turned down the volume on his fear. The Marine stared, momentarily speechless, as the dog let out a long breath and leaned into her touch, grounding himself against her presence. "He doesn't do that," the Marine said quietly, awe threaded through his voice. "I know what fear feels like," she replied, almost apologetically, as if that explained everything. Around them, a few people had slowed, sensing something unusual without fully understanding it, drawn by the stillness that followed the brief alarm. The Marine confessed then, in a voice lowered not out of secrecy but vulnerability, that some nights he woke already exhausted, heart racing as if the day had started in the middle of a nightmare. He admitted that people thanked him for his service in grocery store lines and airports, but no one asked what it cost him to accept that gratitude. She listened now, roles reversed, her expression open and unguarded, and when he finished, she didn't offer sympathy packaged as pity. "They call me strong too," she said softly, "but they don't see how tired I get just trying to be normal." The dog shifted, placing his head fully on her knee, an unmistakable gesture of trust that felt almost deliberate, and she laughed quietly, brushing away a tear before it could fall. In that moment, the invisible lines that separated them, uniform and cane, war and injury, hero and burden, began to blur, replaced by something simpler and far more honest. They were not exchanging stories to impress or to heal each other completely. They were sharing them because, for once, it felt safe to do so. The park continued around them, life moving forward with its usual indifference. But on that bench, time seemed to pause, allowing two very different journeys to intersect in a way neither had expected, and leaving both with the unsettling realization that understanding sometimes arrives from the least obvious direction. As the evening deepened, the park took on a quieter character, the kind that belongs to people who linger because they are not ready to return to whatever waits for them beyond the gates. And the Marine realized he had not checked his watch once since she sat down. A soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the distant sound of a train horn, long and low, a sound that used to tighten his chest but now seemed oddly gentle. The girl shifted slightly on the bench, adjusting her balance with the small, practiced movements that came from years of adaptation, and he noticed how carefully she managed her energy, how nothing about her presence was careless or accidental. She joked about how strangers often spoke to her loudly, as if volume could bridge misunderstanding, and how some people avoided eye contact altogether, afraid of saying the wrong thing and choosing silence instead. He smiled at that, a rueful curve of the lips, admitting that people did the same to him once they learned he was a Marine, either treating him like a monument or a warning sign. The dog listened in his own way, ears swiveling occasionally, body pressed close to both of them, as if forming a quiet barrier against the rest of the world. A child ran past chasing a ball, laughter ringing out, and for a fleeting second the girl's eyes followed with something like longing before she looked away, not bitter but reflective. The Marine caught it and understood without asking, recognizing that look from the mirror, from moments when he watched others move freely through a life that felt just out of reach. He surprised himself by telling her about the day he came home, how the airport applause had felt unreal, almost intrusive, and how he had smiled because that was what was expected, even as part of him wanted to disappear into the crowd. He spoke of the dog again, of the transition from combat partner to companion, of training meant to prepare them both for peace, and how peace, he had learned, required a different kind of courage. She listened with the same intensity he had given her earlier, leaning in slightly, eyes steady, never interrupting. And when he finished, she said simply, "It sounds like you're still learning how to rest." A statement so accurate it left him momentarily silent. People nearby had begun to notice more openly now, some pausing on benches across the path, others slowing their steps, drawn by the unusual sight of a Marine, a service dog, and a girl with a cane sitting so closely, their body language speaking of familiarity that felt earned rather than assumed. The dog sensed the attention and lifted his head, alert but calm, then surprised everyone by deliberately placing one paw on her foot, a grounding gesture that made her laugh out loud. "I think he's claiming me," she said, and the Marine laughed too, the sound rusty but genuine, startling himself with how good it felt. She confessed then that she had almost not asked to sit, that she had circled the park twice because she was tired of being turned into a lesson or a charity case. "Sometimes," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I just want to exist without explaining." The Marine nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he replied, "I just want to sit without being thanked." The honesty of it hung between them, raw and unpolished, and something about that honesty shifted the energy around them. An older woman nearby wiped her eyes discreetly. A man lowered his phone, choosing to watch instead of record. The dog rested his head back on her knee, eyes closing, breathing deep and steady, a visible symbol of trust that needed no translation. The Marine realized then that he was watching not a moment of kindness bestowed, but an exchange, balanced and mutual, and that realization unsettled him in the best possible way. She asked him what he planned to do next, and he admitted he didn't really know, that some days the future felt like a wide, open field, and others like a narrow hallway with too many doors already closed. She smiled at that, saying she understood more than most, that recovery was not a straight line, but a series of small negotiations with yourself. She told him about learning to sit again, how humiliating it felt at first, how every successful movement became a private victory no one else noticed. He told her about relearning how to sleep, how silence could be louder than gunfire, and how the dog had become his anchor during those nights, a steady heartbeat against his leg reminding him where he was. The sun dipped fully behind the trees now, the sky painted in bruised purples and soft oranges, and the park lights flickered on one by one, casting gentle halos along the path. She stood slowly, testing her balance before committing her weight, and the Marine rose with her, instinctively offering an arm in a way that was supportive without being patronizing. She accepted with a nod, grateful rather than diminished, and steadied herself with practiced ease. For a moment, neither of them moved, aware that the encounter was nearing its end and unwilling to rush it. "I'm glad I asked," she said finally, meeting his eyes. He looked at her, at the dog who clearly did not want her to go, at the quiet crowd that had borne witness without fully understanding, and felt something unclench in his chest. "So am I," he replied, and in that simple exchange, something shifted again, subtle but lasting, as if both of them had been reminded that connection did not require perfection, only presence. She took her first step away from the bench slowly, as if testing whether the moment would follow her or stay behind, and the Marine watched her go with a feeling he could not immediately name, something between gratitude and responsibility. The dog whined softly, a sound so small it barely registered, but it pulled at the Marine's chest harder than he expected. She paused and turned back, smiling at the dog as if she understood exactly what that sound meant. And for a second it seemed as though all three of them were reconsidering the idea of separation. Around them, the park resumed its ordinary rhythm. People walking, lights humming, life continuing as it always did, yet the atmosphere carried a subtle charge, as if something meaningful had passed through and left an imprint. The Marine cleared his throat and thanked her again, this time not as a reflex, but as a confession, acknowledging that her presence had shifted something he had been carrying for longer than he liked to admit. She waved off the gratitude gently, explaining that sometimes simply being allowed to sit, to speak, to exist without negotiation was more than enough. As she walked toward the path that led out of the park, she felt lighter than she had when she arrived, not because her body had changed, but because something inside her had been seen without being judged or fixed. The Marine sat back down, the bench suddenly feeling larger and quieter, and rested his forearms on his knees, the dog settling close, pressing his side against the Marine's leg in a familiar gesture of reassurance. He replayed the conversation in his mind, the honesty, the shared pauses, the absence of expectation, and realized that he felt calmer than he had in weeks, maybe months. He understood then that healing did not always arrive through therapy sessions or carefully planned routines, but sometimes through unplanned encounters that reminded you of who you were before the weight of experience tried to define you. Across the park, the girl stopped near the gate and looked back once more, noticing the Marine still seated there, the dog's head resting against his thigh, both of them framed by the soft glow of the lights. She felt an unexpected swell of emotion, not sadness, but a quiet hope, the kind that does not shout but stays with you. She imagined telling the story later, not as something dramatic or miraculous, but as a moment when kindness had moved in both directions and changed everyone involved just enough to matter. Over the next few days, strangers who had been nearby would share what they had seen, some describing the Marine's posture softening, others the dog's unmistakable trust, still others the girl's steady dignity as she stood and walked away. Online, the story would be framed as inspiring, as heroic, as proof of humanity's goodness, and while none of that was untrue, it missed the quieter truth that lived beneath the headlines. The Marine would return to that park again, often at the same hour, sitting on the same bench, not waiting for her specifically, but open in a way he had not been before, more willing to meet the world where it was. He noticed that the dog seemed calmer too, less reactive, more present, as if the encounter had taught him something beyond training. The girl, for her part, found herself less hesitant to ask for space when she needed it, less apologetic for her presence, remembering how a simple question had been met with warmth rather than resistance. Sometimes she smiled to herself when she passed other benches, wondering how many quiet stories were waiting to be told if people were brave enough to ask. Months later, on an ordinary afternoon, their paths crossed again, not with surprise this time, but recognition, a nod, a shared smile, the dog's tail wagging as if no time had passed at all. They did not need to recreate the moment or explain it to each other. It existed on its own, complete and unrepeatable. What remained was its echo, a gentle reminder that the most powerful changes often begin not with grand gestures or speeches, but with a small act of courage, a question spoken softly, and a willingness to make room. And long after the park had emptied and the bench stood alone beneath the tree, that truth continued to move quietly through the lives it had touched, reshaping them in ways no one could measure, proving that sometimes the simplest invitation can carry the greatest impact.